Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Get to Know China, Market Insights, Trend, and Risk Mitigation. I would like to very warmly welcome to the floor David Lavorel, the Business Advisor of USME Center, for today's key presentation. Thank you very much, David. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Davide. Good morning, everybody from the EU SME Center office in Beijing. We will talk about many different things that new prospective exporters to China need to take into account. Loads of things have been written on these slides, but do not worry, we will distribute the presentation before the end of the week. So you don't need to worry about so many things that are in these slides. You will have plenty of time to digest them later on. So what we will talk about today, we will first talk a bit about the regulatory constraints that you have to face when exporting to China. We will see that you absolutely need to do some homework and to do some market research. We will then have a look on the many ways that you can export and distribute your product in China. And then we will also talk about marketing. You need to have your product known to the Chinese customer. We will see briefly what will happen when you get your first sale, and first of many, hopefully. We will then talk about risks, how to mitigate, limit the risk when doing business in China. We'll talk just a little bit about creating your company, because this is a question that we often have here at the USME Center. And I will conclude with some advice and tips. And then, of course, we will have a Q&A session. So let's first talk about the regulatory constraints. And by this, I mostly think about standards, and we will see why they are important to you, why you should be aware of them, how to find them. This is very important. And we will talk a little bit as well on the different market access schemes, on some issues like labeling that are very important. So why are these Chinese standards important for you? For a simple reason is that for most of the product, you need to prove that you conform to the Chinese standards. And to do so, you will have to get the certificate from state-owned laboratories in China. Most of the international certificates are not accepted in China. And it's a pity, but this is the way it goes. And many companies think that because they have already some European standards, it will be fine. No, it's not. Chinese standards are not identical to European standards. They might look similar, but similar is not identical. So let's just very quickly talk about standardization in China. As you can see here, many standards exist, and here I have listed only the national standards. It's more than 47,000, and you have more and more every day. And for example, we already know of 3,000 that will come into force in the coming 2 years. These are the ones that are already published and with already a date when they will come into force. But today, as we speak, some working groups are working on elaborating new standards. So this is a very important topic in China. And the Chinese administration is spending a lot of effort doing standardization work. Why are standards important? Well, generally speaking, they are important everywhere in the world. And the main reason for them to exist is to protect human health, protect personal property and safety. This is the same in China as everywhere else. But as I said, you need to conform to them before your product being allowed in China. So basically, you cannot send your product and say, okay, I send it to China, I stock my product, and then I will see if somebody buys, then I will go into the process of getting a certificate. No, if you send products that are not conform to local standards, they will not go through customs. Customs will refuse them and destroy them, or at best you could potentially get them back after a few months and after paying a huge fee. They are very similar, but similar, not identical. This is what we call Chinese deviation. So when you get a standard, you need to be very careful to read it very carefully from the beginning to the end to make sure that your product are conform to this standard. As I said, most of the international standards are not recognized. This is the same for the test results. Everything basically needs to be done in China. So when I talk about standards, you have to keep in mind that there are four kinds of standards, and the main one are the national standards. I will talk a bit about the others, but they are less important for you as an SME. National standards, you have lots of them, 47,000, but the ones that are very important are the mandatory standards. And for this, we have many thousands of them as well. You need to remember it's called GB standards. This is the national standards. And here you can see that you have different kind of national standards. You have here the GB, Gobiao, and then there is usually a number after that. So these are the ones that you absolutely need to focus on to be compliant with. There are others, for example, GB/T, they are voluntary national standards. Voluntary means not mandatory, but sometimes it's a good idea to be compliant with those because it could give you an edge when you sell your product compared to other competitors that would only be, let's say, compliant with the very basic mandatory ones. And especially many times the voluntary national standards over the years will become mandatory. So this is a good idea to look at them as well because it gives you a trend in terms of standardization for your product. So the trick is that only Chinese version exists. Official translation do exist, but they are very rare. But it is to be noted that the Chinese administration has informed us recently that they plan to develop more translation. That being said, most of them for many years to come will be only in Chinese. But it's not such a big deal, and we will see why. And there are some ways to find them that are quite easy in reality. Professional standards, again, I will go very quickly on this one. You will have time later on to look at that. It's when there is no national mandatory standards, and they cover most of the industries. Hopefully, you don't need to focus on this at the beginning because they are very difficult to identify, very difficult to find because seldom you can find them, let's say, on a PDF format. So you have to buy them, of course, because it's free only for the mandatory standards. All the others, you need to buy them. So to buy them when you are in Europe, it's a bit complicated. And you have, of course, local and enterprise standards, especially enterprise standards. It's mostly standards designed by huge state-owned companies, for example, in the petroleum sector. They are so huge, they have a monopoly on the sector, they can decide their own standard. For most of you guys, this is not important because most probably, at least at the beginning, you will not sell to these companies. So let's get back to what is important, how to find the standards that apply to your product. Well, you can do it by yourself. There are official databases, and the main one is the National Public Service Platform for Standards Information. Oof. So we will see a bit later how to search on this platform, and you will see that it's easier than many people think. You can also use Google to find some English translation. You can, of course, use some AI tools as well. But it's very dangerous because you never know if it's the latest version or not. So I strongly recommend to focus on the official channels. You don't want to make a lot of efforts just to find that you are not talking about the right standards. One of the first things that you need to know, most probably, is to contact your industry association. Most probably, you are not the first company in your sector that wants to export to China. So most probably, at your association, they know a bit about the mandatory standards. They might even have already some translation in your own language or in English. So this is the first call that you need to make. It's your industry association. have a look or contact your national standard administration as well. Sometimes, a part of the bilateral cooperation, they do have some translation of some standards. If you are lucky, yours is part of those. If you are not lucky, well, you move on. And for example, you get in touch with certification companies. Of course, this is their business, so they know the standards. They have all of them. They have their own databases. But of course, they do it for free because they also need to live and to work and to get some money. A very important project that could be very helpful. It's an expert, a European expert seconded in China to deal with standardization. The project purpose is mostly focusing on cooperation between China and Europe on standards, but they know everything you need to know when it comes to very new standards in particular. And they know about discussions about the different agenda of the working groups in some specific sectors. So it could be very helpful to you to be aware of them, because if there is an active working group working on a specific standards linked to your product, you need to know about it. And of course, there is us, the SME Center. We do have an internal database of standards, of translation of standards, mostly in English. And we do know quite a few people, so we sometimes are able to find the right translation of the right standard. But let's have a look to the official platforms and how to use them. And you will see this is not that complicated. So we will choose, I have chosen as an example to use furniture to see what kind of standards I need to comply to if I do furniture and if I want to export some to China. So first, I need to go to the National Public Service Platform for Standard Information website, and you have on the top of your screen the web link of the platform. Of course, everything is in Chinese, so it can be a bit of a bad surprise, but do not worry. You will recognize on the left, it's the International Classification of Standards. So this is the official category valid everywhere. It's just that they are in Chinese. And what is important is that it's the search box. Do not worry about the other stuff here for the time being. And of course, here you have a list of standards, and because this is the home page, it will be every time different. And these are the latest standard published, so you don't need to worry about them. At this stage, just worry about this one. This is a search box. This is in Chinese, but this is not something that you need to worry about. So you can directly write, for example, furniture here, and then search, and you will see what's happening. So what you get, it's the results, and you will see two things. First, in fact, I'm cheating here because the results are all in Chinese, but you can use the automatic translation tool of your web browser. It's very bad for literature, but it's more than enough for, let's say, technical documents like this web page. And then, with this translation, you recognize on the left the International Classification System. You see the result. The result, you see loads of things. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, you have almost 200 records. This is clearly too much. It means that using only furniture as a keyword is not enough. It's not precise enough. So you will need to come up with detailed keywords that are very, very linked to your product. But as a matter of example, let's see the result. You see a lot here on the first page. GBT, remember, voluntary standards, so no need to focus on them. You need always to focus on the mandatory one is GB with a number. Yes, generally, this GB, the reference of the standard, and this is the date of the standard. This is the date of its publication. So at this stage, imagine that this is the one for you. You do bathroom furniture. You copy all of this, and then you go to another database. And you have the address, the web link on top here of the page. Again, everything is in Chinese, but do not worry about it. Just copy paste the reference here and do a search here. And then you obtain this. Again, everything in Chinese except this sentence. This is the translation of the title of the standard. Title is fine, but this is the only part that will be translated. Again, this is all in Chinese. You want to know more because you don't understand what are these logos and these characters. So you use, again, the automatic translation tool of your web browser, and you obtain a nice translation. Again, the name of the title, but you can see that you can then download the standard here. So you click on this one and it will download the PDF document. This is valid only for mandatory standards. It's free of charge. So it's a nice PDF document in Chinese. As I said, it's most of the time only in Chinese, but then you can use some automatic translation tools, or, as I said previously, find some ways to get a translation. So what you need to remember at this stage is that if your product is already covered by the European standard, most probably there will be a Chinese equivalent. Not identical, again, but equivalent. So let's talk a bit about conformity assessment. It's basically the process that verify and certify that your product conform to standards. And the standards, once you will have look at them, well, they detail all the characteristics, the minimum legal requirements for your product, and the laboratory that you will have to deal with will test your product and make sure that its characteristics are within the limits stated in the standard. And again, most probably you will not escape this. You will need to comply and to have your product tested by a Chinese laboratory in China. Again, everything will be done in China. And again, I think you have gotten the message now. This is exactly the opposite approach from the EU. In the EU, you make something, you are the administration presume that you are compliant with the standards, and it's only after your product is on the market that there might be some verification. In China, it's the opposite. You have to prove that your product conforms to standard before being allowed to get your product on the market. So there are different also market access schemes that you need to be aware of. It depends on the product, of course. You have the list here. I will not go into much detail, but for example, if you do chemical equipment, most probably you will need a special equipment license. This is here. It's valid for pressure vessels in different industries as well. If you do some medical equipment or some healthcare equipment, it's like everywhere in the world. There are some specific requirements, so nothing much of a surprise here. Similar with cosmetics, there is a different procedure. We have the same procedure in Europe. In principle, of course, the contents, the process in itself might be very different, but this is the common way of doing things in every country. And of course, food and beverage, in addition to the SPS issues that are here, phytosanitary certificates, are also existing in China, and you need to be aware of them, depending, of course, on your product. I want to talk a little bit about CCC because it is a very popular one. And for many consumer goods, consumer products, you need to conform to this and to get the logo, and you need to then put, if you do are compliant with the requirements, you have to put this logo on your product. And typically, this is something very easily to control. So you need to be careful about this. It's especially true if you do, for example, products that are toys or children products, but you have also many exceptions depending on the product. You know, it's like everywhere else. If there is a rule, of course, there are exceptions to the rules. And for CCC, it depends mostly of what you want to do with your product. For example, if your product is not yet with the CCC mark, you can still send it to China if it's to be used or showed at an exhibition. But you need to fulfill some documents. There is a specific procedure. It's not just that you send the product and that's the custom, you tell them, don't worry, it's just for the exhibition. No, it will not get clear at the customs if you do not have the proper paperwork. But of course, it depends on the client. For example, if you sell to the military, for example, to firefighters, which are a kind of a branch of the military here, you can get a pass on this CCC marking. Again, similar, if your client is a research facility, sometimes you can get a pass for this certification. But to be clear, these are exceptions. So if you plan to sell your product, if you have verified, as we said, that there is a market for your product, you do need to right away start the homologation procedure, because it takes time. It will take months before getting the final approval on the right to put the CCC mark on your product. But I will not talk too much about this. You will have on our website a report with all the details about how it works, how long it takes, how much it costs for the different standards, for the different market access labels, including for textile, for example, for cosmetics. You will find plenty of information on what you need to be compliant with. So now that we have seen that in terms of compliance, you are okay, or you know how it's done, you need to do some market research. Is there a demand for your product? Of course, many people think that, okay, China is a big country, 1.3 or something billion of people. Of course, there are people looking for my product. Well, this is not necessarily true. So you need to do your market research. I would not explain you how to do a market research because you know well how to do that. This is what you do every time you approach a new market, and you should do the same here. Do not assume anything. So look at your known competitors and look what they do in China. Same with your existing clients. Are they already in China? Because there can be a kind of easy mark at the beginning. You have plenty of sources of information online already to do your homework. You have specialized websites by sectors, for example. You can, if you do consumer goods, even food and beverage, look at the e-commerce platforms, and you can get loads of information. You can start by typing the name of your product, and sometimes it's a surprise because your product is already available in China by different means. Sometimes it could be a good surprise, sometimes not so good surprise, but this is one of the basics that you have to do at the beginning to get a sense of what's going on in China. One thing that you need to be very aware of is your price. You need to know your price. And this is very important to keep in mind, is that nowadays in China, you find pretty much everything in good quality and cheaper than you. Similar quality and cheaper than you. It means that if the only way that you differentiate yourself with the competition is price, you will have a tough time in China. You need to have really a hard look at your strategy, at your positioning, because if the only way to differentiate your product with the rest of the market is price, it's almost impossible to be successful here. And a good way to get a feel about the state of the art, so to speak, in China is to visit a trade fair. Of course, ideally, it's to exhibit, but you could also visit and possibly mix this with some tourist visit. But when you visit a trade fair in China these days, you get loads of surprise. You can see that many Chinese companies are doing great things. I was yesterday at SIAL, which is, let's say, the major food and beverage exhibition in China, and I talked to many European SMEs, and many of them were very surprised by the quality of the offering. Quality for the food and beverage products, of course, but there was also a section about packaging equipment, packaging machinery, and it was also a bit of a surprise. Not necessarily a great surprise, but it was a surprise. It's the same across all the sectors. Last week, we were at the main cosmetics exhibition named Beauty China, and it was very similar. They are now very good in terms of quality, but also very creative, coming up with new products. It's not a copy of existing product. They are coming up with new products that most probably are created in China and will appear in a few months in your home market. So it's also very interesting to know what's going on here, because it could be very well the beginning of trends that you will face in your home market. I mentioned trade fairs. You have loads of them in China. It's in a business in itself. So you have many. You have very broad ones. You have very specialized ones. You have some that are very much local, for example, with attendance mainly from one specific province. So you will find in this guide available on our website the main ones, but you will find also information and advice on what to do or not to do at a trade fair. A trade fair in China is quite different from a trade fair in Europe, and everything is explained in this report. Of course, not all the fairs are listed in this document, but we have in-house a big database of all the trade fairs. So if you need a very specific one, please do get in touch and we will give you the right information. You need to know more about the consumer, and for that, in addition to the market research that you will do, especially if you do B2C on the food and beverage or consumer goods, we have now launched a series of webinars on the consumer. We already have done one about active retirees, another one about Gen X, and the idea is to look at these categories as these generations and to see what they are thinking, what they are buying in terms of imported product, and where they are buying them. So this is very important for you to know, because you don't want to spend so much effort on a specific channel if you target a category of population that is not active on this channel. So please do have a look, and we have a few other upcoming in the next following weeks and months. So now let's talk a bit about exporting and distributing. You have basically two main ways to enter the Chinese market. We have the general trade. This is also what we call the traditional way. This is the way you use for every other market in the world. And we have what is called here the cross-border e-commerce, CBEC. You will probably hear a lot about this if you are interested by the Chinese market. It's a very specific Chinese schemes, and I will develop it in just a bit. And of course, they all have their advantage and inconvenience, and we will have a look at them right now. So general trade, this is the traditional way to do things. You need then to be compliant, to conform to standards. All the things that I mentioned up to now, you need to conform to that in order to have no problem at the custom and to have your product available for the prospective buyers here. In some cases, for example, food and beverage, it means also you need to register your company on your product on a specific database called Cipher. It's managed by the customs. It's not difficult. It's like every form, it's every process. It sounds very difficult at the beginning because you don't know about it. But as soon as you know about it, and you will find many information about this on our website. As soon as you know a bit about it, well, it's very easy to manage. And you have then this cross-border e-commerce. So what it is? It's a scheme following which the process is very simple. As a consumer in China, it's exactly the same as if I buy the product in your home country. As a tourist, I go to visit your country, I go into a shop, I buy a product. And then I come back to China, and my product does not have any label in Chinese, does not necessarily comply with the local standard. Well, this is the same philosophy, but put on an e-commerce platform. It's on specific e-commerce platform. It's only Chinese e-commerce platforms, and it's only for a limited number of products. You have about 1,500 products that are allowed under these schemes. On most of the food and beverage products, about half of these numbers are on the list. So it means that you can sell this product using the Chinese e-commerce platform. You don't need to worry too much about the currency. You don't need to worry too much about the logistics because you can benefit for a fee from the logistics, all the knowledge, know-how of the said platform, which are the biggest in China. So they have good things and not so good things about them. It's in theory very easy to open an e-store and then to sell your product on these platforms. The problem is that everything is in Chinese, and to open an e-store is nice, but to get traffic on the in this shop, in this e-shop, is a different story. So it sounds very appealing, but it's not that easy. To know more about this, I recommend reading our report. It explains everything, including the limits. And there is, for example, a limit in terms of how much a Chinese can spend via this platform. So, for example, if you have to sell the same product to the same customer over and over, very quickly you will reach a limit. So it might not be ideal. It depends a bit on the product, on the model that you want to follow. To know more about the main platforms that I mentioned, we did a series of webinars, and the recordings are available on our website. One is about Tmall Global. This is the main one. The second biggest one is Jingdong, or also known as JD. And you have the last one is WeChat. WeChat is a weird animal because you can do pretty much everything with it. For example, this morning I paid my electricity bill with it. You can also use it as a social media, but also now they have a module about cross-border e-commerce. So everything is explained for each platform in each of the webinars, how it works, how much that costs, how much do you need to budget to be efficient, and of course, also some indication about is it good for this kind of product or this platform is better for this kind of product, on how to, let's say, manage also social media in order to get really traffic on this platform. Because at the end of the day, you do not want to have a store. You want to have visitors and buyers. So imagine that your product is not on the list. Oh, yes, I forgot to mention that in our report, there is the famous list, the positive list, the 1,476 products is in annex of our report. So the first thing that you need to do, if you are doing consumer goods, because it's valid only for consumer goods, you need to go over the list. And if your product is on the list, well, you could consider doing CBEC. But if your product is not on the list, well, CBEC is not for you. So you need to fall back to the traditional way of doing things. And this traditional way is to find distributors because, of course, you can directly sell, but it's a bit complicated from Europe. It depends very much on the product. If you do big equipments, you can do it directly from Europe. If it's not so, most probably you will need distributors plural, because as I remember my first Chinese lesson, China is big. This was the first sentence of my first lesson, and it's kind of true. It means that there is no distributor that is very efficient all over China. They most probably are very good in one city, and sometimes cities can be very big, more than a few million people living in many cities in China. They can be very active in a certain category of market. So this is something you need to be aware of, and it means that you cannot have only one distributor. But of course, it's like in every country, you can have two or three main distributors, and under them other distributors, but you need to manage yourself the distribution of your product if you want to be sure about how your product is distributed, promoted, and the like. So to find them, you first need to know what you want. On many companies want to have a distributor which already have some experience working with other foreign companies, because then they know a bit about the cultural issues that can appear when we talk between Europeans and Chinese. They can speak English, for example, but you just need to be careful that on the portfolio of these prospective distributors, there is no competitors of yours, of course. You can do this in many ways. You can do it yourself. You can use internet, Google, ChatGPT, or the like. You can go at fairs, as I mentioned. Maybe you have already been approached when you exhibit at a fair in Europe, for example, by an entrepreneur saying, okay, I want to distribute your product in China. You can ask around at your industry association and the like. But let's face it, it's very difficult because everything is in Chinese, and most probably you have a limited ability to read and write and speak Chinese. So it's a kind of a challenge, not to mention a different time zone. So most of the companies, they hire specialists to do so. You have many consulting companies here in China that do this kind of work, but also some chambers of commerce, also some trade sections of embassies. So these are the first one that you need to call to check out. And of course, when you have found one or more distributors, you need to do some background check, legal, financial, of course. You need to be sure that you do not partner with someone who is about to get bankrupt, for example, who is in the middle of legal battle with other foreigners, for example. So you don't want to be in this situation because you have so many other things to do. And then, if everything is fine across the board, you need to sign a contract. You need a contract, and you always need to think what's happening when something goes wrong. You need, of course, to hope for the best, and this is the mindset when you approach a new market, but you always need to prepare with the worst. And this is not always an easy discussion to have, but this is imperative to have this discussion and to have a contract that states very clearly what's happening when, for example, some obligations are not met. For example, if you define a certain target in terms of sales, and if the targets are not reached, you need to have the next step clearly stated in the contract. And you do not, please do not use a template of a contract found on the internet. Most probably it will not be enforceable in China. Even the contract that you use in your home country, even the one that you use in Europe, most probably they are not enforceable in China. So you need to contact a lawyer in China that will prepare for you the right contract, the contract that will protect your interest. And on this, do not hire or use the lawyer of your prospective partner. You have to have your own lawyer that will have in mind your interest and not your prospective partner interest in mind. So let's imagine again that everything is fine across the board. So you can sell your product. The products are allowed in China. You know how to sell them. Well, you need to make yourself known and your product known. So you need to do some marketing and communications. You have, of course, the usual tools, the trade fairs, for example, and technical conference. This is very important in China. You have also specialized publications. It depends also on your sectors, on your product. You have also traditional media. Quick note about this. In China, most of the traditional media, a bit like in Europe, are facing tough times. For example, magazines, for example, fashion magazines have almost disappeared in the paper form and is now transformed in a specialized website or special accounts on some special social media. So you need to be aware of that. Most probably it's a good thing when you are an EU SME willing to be visible on these outlets. And of course, point of sale, very, very important, not only about food and beverage. This is something, of course, you know very well in Europe. This is also the same, for example, for cosmetics. Most of the sales are done online, but point of sale promotion are essential. As I mentioned, online tools, you have a specialized website, but you have also e-commerce platforms. They all offer marketing tools in order to increase the traffic on your platform to get known, of course, for a fee. Nothing is free in your country, but it's the same here. But you have to keep in mind that in terms of social media, for example, this is a very, very different landscape. All the social media that you are on in Europe, well, they do not exist in China. There is no Facebook, no Instagram. Nobody knows about them because it's forbidden to access them. So everything should be on the local social media. Some of them are kind of very similar to the one that I just mentioned. Some others are quite different. And everything nowadays is promoted on social media. It's not only consumer goods, everything. For example, this morning I looked at my WeChat feed and I got one video about some tools to assess the quality and safety on railways. And then the next one was about equipment for slaughtering houses specialized in chicken. So you can imagine that you have very, very different things, and you can organize and make sure about what people see thanks to the platform. This is something that you can buy. You can talk to the platform and say, okay, I want people who love railways and live in Beijing to see my videos. So this is something very important. And to know more about this, please do watch the recording of a webinar we did a few months ago, explaining all these platforms, all these social media platforms, how they can be useful for you or not, because they are not necessarily all useful for you. You need to have, again, a strategy, otherwise you will spend a lot of effort, a lot of money for not much of a result. So again, be already very informed about what this platform can bring to you and for what cost. Because you have so many things to do, so many things then to pay, and most probably you do not have millions of euros and RMB to spend, especially at the beginning. So you need to be very careful about the different tools that you want to use. This was about social media. In terms of marketing, I strongly suggest to watch the webinars that we did a couple of weeks ago about online marketing for industrial equipment and products. Of course, this is very different in a way from consumer goods, for example, but many similarities. Again, similarities does not mean identical. So in this webinar, our expert explained the different things that you need to consider, and especially to always remember that if online is very big, offline it's still very big, especially for equipment, especially for B2B. So you need to have a marketing strategy that encompasses online and offsite. And typically, for example, to have a WeChat account, a corporate WeChat account, and to have the QR code of this account plastered on your booth out of prayer. Like this, some people pass in front of your booth, they see you are busy, they pass the second time, you are still busy. If they cannot scan and get then later information, you are potentially losing an interesting contact. In the coming weeks, we will do other events, and we are working now on two important conferences. One will be about online marketing for consumer goods, and another one about more specific about food and products, food and beverage products. They will be both in Shanghai, but also online. So if you are by any chance in Shanghai at this moment, do not hesitate to register and to come to exchange with us. About this and others event, I strongly recommend to subscribe to our newsletter so that you are informed about the upcoming events. You can then register, attend them, but also, and this is a big plus, directly ask questions to the experts, to the presenters of the event. So this is something you could consider. Imagine now that everything went fine, and it will be fine, and you get first a very good potential customer, very much into your product, is okay with the price and so on, with the logistics of it all. Well, you again need to be careful. You need to do like you do everywhere else. You need to know who is this company to make sure that this company is who they say they are. Do they have enough money to pay your product? This is something normally you do everywhere. You need a contract, like everywhere normally. And as I said, like for distributors before, you need a contract that can be enforced in China, because what's the point to spend 2 years in court somewhere in Europe to have a good decision awarded to you, but not being able to enforce it in China? It means that you will have lose money and time. So this is not something you want. So please consider having a lawyer in China writing or at least reviewing your contract, commercial contract. On this, I want to spend a minute or so to warn you about possible scams. We have seen quite a few times for many months now, companies, European companies that have been asked to pay some fee. So the situation is like this. They find a prospective customer. The guy is okay with the price, okay with everything, but suddenly he asks, say, 500 or 1,000 euros for notarization of the contract, or for formalities with the bank, or for an administration. And they, of course, explain that there is no need to worry. This is the normal process. And of course, this will be detected after that. Well, you are selling products, so you need to get back some money. You do not send money. Most of the times, there are scams. There is no need for any notarization of any contract when doing some business in China. So be aware of this. If someone, for whatever reason, start to ask you money, it's a big, big, big red flag. Again, you sell products, so you want money. You don't want to send money. So we are then right in the risk mitigation. You have on our website a report detailing all the things you need to be aware or wary about in terms of relationship and contact with prospective partners or a supplier or whatever. The many things you need to be very careful, to look carefully at in order to avoid losing money. There is a report, there is a webinar where the lawyers explain in a little bit of more details the situation and what to do in case of an issue. Then everything is going well, and you are wondering about creating your own company. And we all know that in some markets, this is the first thing that you do, because nowadays, for example, in Europe, it's very easy to create a company. You can do it in a matter of hours or days, depending on the country. But actually, in China, it's a bit more complicated than this. Of course, in theory, if you are a Chinese citizen, you can indeed create a company in a matter of hours or days, similar as in Europe. But you are not a Chinese citizen, you are a foreign company, so it's very different. So creating a company is a bit of a challenge. Running it, it's a bit of a challenge. On closing it, it's a big challenge. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, do you really need to create a company? In some cases, yes. For example, in some sectors, there is a mandatory obligation to do so. It's often linked to liability, and it's often linked to the product being dangerous or presenting potential risk. And there are some mandates to create your own subsidiary here to deal with maintenance, for example. Another possibility is you sell a lot of products and now you want to sell more, and to sell it in the local currency could be very helpful because dealing with foreign currency with China, it could be very time consuming. There are loads of formalities. The local currency is not freely convertible, so it could be very difficult, and it could be an impediment on your commercial activities. So maybe this could be a reason. Similar for human resources. If you want to handle everything when it comes to sales, you want to have your own salespeople, a lot of people, well, most probably creating a company would be the solution. And then it's what kind of legal entity? You have three main kinds in China: the WOFI, the fully owned, 100% owned company; the joint venture, typically with a distributor or a producer with whom you already work; or you have a representative office. The instinct for many people, many foreign companies is, oh, let's do a representative office. Well, it's most probably not a good idea because in China, with a representative office, you cannot do much. You cannot do any sales. You cannot get any revenue. Normally, you cannot do much except spending money, having people doing some market research, for example, but again, not engaging in commercial activities. So it's not very useful, and it's very difficult to close. So this is probably not the way to go. And most probably it will be a WOFI that you will need. But again, even for this, you have very different possibilities, different options. So this is something for which you will need some assistance with. Generally speaking, the idea is that you do not create an entity before having very strong sales flow. You do not want to create a company, trying your hand at China and finding out after a year or two that there is no future for your product here. So you pack your stuff and go back home. This is possible to do in other markets, for example, in the US, or if you are in Romania, to do it with France. But this is very, very difficult to do this in China. And it's a bit of a challenge because everyone that you will meet, and especially a prospective distributor, will tell you to create a company here. And most probably they will tell you that they can help with that you don't need to worry about a thing, that they will take charge of all the formalities. Well, you need to be very cautious about this. You need to always remember to go your own pace, your own way, according to your own strategy. You will hear many times the term China speed. This is marketing. You need to go on your own way, on your own speed, especially at the beginning. It doesn't mean you can't be flexible, but you need to be very, very reasonable at the beginning, especially. To know a bit more about setting up a company, we did a few days ago a conference about setting up a company, running a company, and closing a company. It was not from a legal standpoint, but on a financial standpoint, because the theory is that, okay, you have many things to do to create a company, many forms to fulfill, but then you need to run it. You need to have fun with the tax bureau. You need to have an accounting system, and you need to make sure that it's compatible with the one that you have at your headquarters. And you need to make sure that the finance bureau here, the tax office are on board, and that you do the right things from the start. And it's not that easy. And similar for closing a company. As I mentioned before, closing a company, when things are going well, means you do not lose a lot of money. It's very difficult. So can you imagine if you have loads of debts, closing a company is very difficult. Let's now come to the end of this presentation by a few advice and tips. You now see my points. You need to do your homework. You can, from your own country, get loads of information. and you need to have a lot of information to design a strategy. It's so easy here to waste time, to waste resources because it's so big, you have so many players, so you need to design a plan and to follow your plan. Again, you can be flexible, but keep in mind your plan. You also need all the help you can get. You need to contact the local chamber of commerce. You need to call your industry association. You need to get in touch with the chamber of commerce of your member state if there is one in China. You need to contact your embassy. Many of them have a trade counselor that can be very helpful. You have also service providers. If, for example, you are Italian, contact ICE, contact the Italian Chamber of Commerce. If you are French, again, they have also a big Chamber of Commerce here that can be very helpful. There is Business France who do lots of things, for example, helping you organizing a mission to meet prospective distributor. It's a huge help and often very cheap or cheaper than what the service providers, the private sector is offering. So this is the first people that you need to contact because they can be very, very helpful. Again, the idea is for you not to waste time, not to waste resources. There is no point to reinvent the wheels. There is no point to do the same mistakes that were done by others before you. You need to learn from everybody, and this is a good way to do so. You need to be aware of the regulatory framework. This is what we talked at the very beginning. Things are changing here, often quite fast. But again, not that big of an issue if you have a good distributor with whom you work regularly, you contact and you visit regularly. They will be the one with the boots on the ground that will tell you that they will be informed at the very beginning and they will be able to tell you, okay, there is a new regulation being working now. You need to be aware of. Maybe it will impact your product. Maybe it will impact the registration. So this is something you need to be aware of. Again, you don't want to be in a situation where your container is stuck as customs. Never a good idea. China is special. This is something you probably heard. This is something you will hear all the time, especially when you visit China. But actually, it's not so special. Many things that you do well for other markets, well, do the same here. Trust is nice, friendship is wonderful, but the contract is essential. Due diligence on potential partners, whatever they are, essential. It doesn't mean you cannot trust, but as we always say for every market, trust but verify. So it sounds a bit dark. It is not. You have many SMEs that are very successful, and this is another thing that you can find on our website. It's case studies of SMEs, European SMEs, that explain what they did, how they approached the market, the challenges that they faced, how they did overcome them, and now they are pretty successful. So they also share with you some bit of advice, some best practices derived from their own experience. But it means, everything considered, that this is a tough market, loads of competition, and it's probably not a market for you if you have never exported anywhere. It's very complicated if you have no experience when it comes to export formalities, for example. Most probably, if you have no experience exporting, consider exporting to a neighboring country. For example, within Europe, then you will have no issue with currency, for example, exchange rate, the way the formalities when it comes to exchange. You will have a limited problem with VAT. If there is an issue with the distributor, well, most probably you can jump in your car and within a few hours be face to face with the guy and see what the real problem is. So please keep this in mind. And as a matter of conclusion, I strongly suggest to read our report named Ways to Enter the Chinese Market, and it goes into way more depth on the very topics that I mentioned during this presentation. And basically, this is the must-read report. Most of the time, after reading this report, you can know, okay, this is a good potential for me or not.